All right, so let's get into the muscles now. And I want you guys to try to think through this process. I know the answers are on the board. I'm not taking them away from you. But let's try to think through this. So the first muscle up there is your serratus anterior. Yeah? Your serratus anterior if I remember correctly. Inserts into the vertebral or medial border of your scapula, which is which side? Which side of my scapula is my vertebral or medial border? Touch it. Palpate it. This side, right? The inside. Now it courses underneath my scapula, wraps around, and it originates on the top 8 ribs. You guys cool with that? You guys know this muscle. You guys ever seen bodybuilders and they do this thing? They're like, dude, I'm so huge, my lats got teeth. You guys know what I'm talking about? No, you have no idea. You guys know what I'm talking about. Those little teeth that come out right here? That's not your lat. That's your serratus anterior poking out. In fact, the name serratus comes from what? It looks like a serrated knife, right? It's that shape. Well, if it attaches from ribs to scapula, what joint is it going to move? Not my shoulder. My scapula, right? We kind of said that these two joints, we say we can kind of combine them and we call it movement of the scapula, right? So we're talking about the scapula. So that's the joint. What are my joint actions for my scapula? Let's make a little word bank. Good. Protraction, retraction. Who are we missing? Good. So we know that the serratus anterior is going to move my scapula, and these are my scapular joint actions. Now we just have to figure out which joint actions my serratus anterior is going to cause. Well, is my serratus anterior going to move my ribs? Probably not much. Ribs don't like to move all that much. It's definitely going to pull my scapula then towards my origin, which is going to look like what? What is this muscle going to do when it contracts? Right, so is it going to do this? Show me. If you can't tell me, show me. So what joint action is that? Protraction, right? Protraction. Now the other joint action the serratus anterior does is a little complicated. Well, it's not complicated, it's just not as easy to visualize. So what ends up happening is, what would happen to my scapula if my serratus anterior pulled the bottom of my scapula in this direction? What joint action would I have? Upward rotation. That's it. We're done with serratus anterior. Was that terrible? Yep, that was terrible. Okay, on to the next muscle. Should we do pec minor? Sure, why not? Why not do the pec minor? So my pec minor originates from ribs 3, 4, and 5 and inserts into my coracoid process. So it's a muscle on the front here, right? So I'll draw the front of my scapula, my little coracoid process here. I'll put some ribs in. Little pec minor. You guys want to feel your pec minor? I'm going to show you how to palpate your pec minor. Which direction are those fibers? More or less vertical, right? Which way does your pec major run? Across. So your pec major is on top of your pec minor. So we need to feel through your pec major. So what you're going to do is you're going to kind of relax your pec major. On the outside of your pec major here, you're going to strum this way. And what you'll start to feel if you kind of dig in there is you'll start to feel like some vertical guitar strings that you can kind of strum over that are probably pretty tender. Some of you guys a little tender? These guys tend to get pretty tight. Yeah? No? Is anybody having a problem feeling their pec minor? I can come over and help you palpate. I don't have a problem with this. Who can't feel their pec minor? Everybody's going to feel their pec minor. All right. So your pec minor is right in those fibers right there. Some of you guys are probably just not pressing hard enough, or you're pressing too far over. Those guys right there. Those guys right there. Everybody I touch is like, oh God, yes, these muscles have a tendency to get tight, sore. Everybody got it? You got it? All right, press deep. It's right here. All right, so what do these fibers do? What do this muscle do? What joint actions? Well, what joint does it cross? What joint? Not shoulder joint. Shoulder would be the combination of my humerus and my scapula. This goes from rib cage to scapula, which means who's it going to move? Scapula. All right, so what joint actions do you think this muscle can do? Protraction. It's on the front. That's a good guess. What else? Depression. Right? Yeah, it has that vertical arrangement. It's going to want to kind of pull this way, right? If it pulls on the outside corner that way, what happens? And a little downward rotation. Nice job. That's pec minor. Yes, ma'am. Great question. So traditionally, origins and insertions have been based on, origin is the more stable of the two attachments of the muscle, but that doesn't always work out. You will see some textbooks where it's written proximal and distal attachment, right? Generally, origins are more proximal. That's not always the case. Let me tell you how much I care about which one's the origin and which one's the insertion. Initially, guys, you don't even have to memorize the origins and insertions. If you can memorize the bones and visualize roughly where they're at on the bone, you're in good shape. Later, origins and insertions will mean a lot more to you as you get more into like pathology and problems that happen and injuries that happen. Then you have to start understanding origins and insertions a little bit better. Right now, your big thing today, what bone does it attach to? What joint does it move? What direction is it going to move that joint in? That's it. Right? Slowly but surely you can add origins and insertions later. And honestly, whether you flip them, it doesn't matter. I mix up origins and insertions all the time as far as which one's which. Guess how much it affects my practice? oh my God, did you see what he did? He touched the insertion and he thought it was the origin. Haven't been fired yet for that one. You're okay. All right, trapezius. You guys know where your traps are? Do you know why your trapezius is called your trapezius? It's shaped like a trapezoid. What's a trapezoid shape? It's a kite shape, right? You guys know that? So you guys are doing good in kinesiology and you did great in geometry is what you're telling me? So yeah, a trapezoid is a kite shaped. And that's how your traps are shaped. That's a trapezoid. There's a lopsided trapezoid. Let's change this just a little bit. Everybody's cool with that? All right, let's. The funny thing about the trap is it's actually kind of like 3 muscles. Too big. That's not going to work. All right. Head, spine. Everybody's good with that? Scapula. Scapula. All right. Now let's draw the trap. So we have upper trap that goes from the acromion process and spine of the scapula to external occipital protuberance, down your ligamentum nuchae, which is a ligament in your spine, and into maybe the top thoracic vertebrae. Then you have more middle trapezius that connects to kind of this midsection of the spine of your scapula, and to some more of those middle thoracic vertebrae. You guys still cool? All right, maybe this one actually comes off more like this. And then you have your lower trapezius, which goes from spine of scapula all the way down to T12. So you got upper, middle, and lower. So the trapezius goes from spine to scapula. What's it going to move? Your scapula for the most part. All right? Now let's start with the upper. That's this fiber direction right here. What joint actions do you think the upper trap is going to cause? Maybe some elevation. You guys think that's a good call? I think that's a good call. So we've got a little bit of elevation. What else? Yeah, it pulls on this outside edge here, right? So if it pulls up on the outside edge, isn't my scapula going to want to do that? Yeah, so it'll contribute to some upward rotation. What is the middle one's going to do? These guys. Which one? A muscle can't do its 2 opposing joint actions. Yeah, if it contracts, it's going to retract. What about my lower traps? What are they going to do? Depression, that's a good call. I think they'll pull this way. What else? Man, that picture started out looking so clean, and now it's beginning to look like a mess. Sorry about that. Start over. We'll just do one scapula. That didn't come out very good. Man, that purple marker is dying. All right, so I had my upper guys pulling this way, I have my middles pulling this way, and my lowers pulling this way. So my lower will do depression. What else will it do? Ooh, we have a debate going. I heard one upward rotation and one downward rotation. Which one is it going to do? You guys remember my pinwheel analogy? You guys want to change your answer? Can you guys see this? If I pull down on this inside corner, what happens to my glenoid fossa? It goes up, right? Can you guys see that? If I pull down here, this goes up. Upper trap pulls from the outside, which is why it also goes up. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool. Guys are cruising through the scapula muscles. Cruising. Levator scapulae. With a name like levator scapulae, what do you think is a joint action this muscle might contribute to? Elevation. Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes we get a give me in the PT or in the anatomy world. You got to take them when they come. All right. So let's do levator scapulae. Levator scapulae. What joint are we moving again? Yeah, I'm going to guess with levator scapulae as the name, we're also going to be moving the scapula. Given that it has an origin on the superior angle of the scapula, and then an insertion into the transverse processes of C1 through 4. All right, so up on the top of the cervical spine, it kind of looks like this. What joint actions do we got? Elevation, but you're not done. So I agree with you, it's elevation. It will definitely do some of this. But if it pulls on this corner, what happens to this? Yeah. It's a downward rotator. So by pulling up on this corner, that causes this guy to go down that way. Does that make sense? Cool. You guys ready for rhomboids? Rhomboids. There's a major and a minor, but we can think about them as one muscle for the most part. They go from C7 to T5. All right, C7 to T5 on the spine to the medial border of the scapula. All right. Why are they called rhomboids? Because they're shaped like a rhombus. Right? If they go from spine to scapula, what are they probably going to move? Scapula. Based on the direction of their fibers, what joint action is it going to be good at? I like that. What joint action is that? Retraction. So you have a muscle that's shaped like this. Right? Yeah, it's going to pull this way. Anybody want to take a guess on what rotation it does? Everybody's cool with downward? You guys got that pretty quick, huh? So yeah, you can kind of see how in this direction it would pull the scapula here. Right? Or another way to look at it is, if I upwardly rotated my scapula, what would happen to my rhomboids? They'd get stretched out, right? Which means when they contract, they'd pull me back down into downward rotation. Does that make sense? All right, you guys are killing it. Killing it. So I think we're ready for our first graph. Go to page 11. So I'm going to make you kind of flip stuff. All the answers you need we've already gone over, but I'm just kind of flipping how you look at this. So what I want you to do is, how many boxes do you guys got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So they can, in that graph, I included anterior and posterior tipping as the last two boxes. You can skip those if you want. I want one joint action per box for the 6 joint actions we have up here. You're then going to tell me what plane each one of those joint actions is, what muscles are responsible for each joint action, and a sample exercise for each joint action. You guys good with this? I'll give you a big hint on the muscles. There's at least 2 muscles per joint action. In fact, for most of the joint actions, there's only 2 muscles. There is a couple where a third muscle could be added. You guys got, how much time you need? 5 minutes? You guys can confer with each other, and then we'll throw it up on the board. All right, so what are my joint actions, guys? So I got protraction, retraction. What else? Upward, rotation, downward, rotation, elevation, and depression. What plane is protraction in? Transverse. What plane is retraction in then? Transverse. Upward and downward rotation. What about elevation and depression? Huh? Frontal. All right, we already knew that from earlier today, so now let's add the muscles to this. Who will protract the scapula? Serratus anterior is actually your primary protractor, so you guys can put a star by that one. Who else? Pectoralis minor. Who wants to pick an exercise? What's an exercise that includes protraction? Maybe not pull-ups. Bench. Bench. Anything we, in fact, we could generalize a little bit and just call it pushing. Anytime you push something, you want to protract your scapula. What about retraction? What are the muscles that retract? middle trapezius, and rhomboids. All right, what's an exercise that would include retraction? Reverse fly? Sure. If pushing includes protraction, what probably includes retraction? Pulling. Upward rotators. Serratus anterior, thank you. Big important one. And this is one of the ones that has 3 muscles. Upper and lower traps. What's an example of an exercise with upward rotation? Lateral raise, sure. Downward rotation. Pectoralis minor. And levator scapulae. And rhomboids. Nice job. What's an exercise? Pull up. Sure. Elevation. Who's going to elevate? Upper trap and levator scapulae. Exercise. Shrugs. Depressors. Pec minor and lower trap. Exercise. That one's a tough one, right? We don't really do a lot of exercises with just depression. No, that'll just pull you into depression. Maybe the top of a dip, right? Like if you really try to push through the top. I could see that, top of a dip. There's a physical therapy thing, something called a functional push-up. I'll show you guys what this is. So people, for example, who have lost some of their lower extremity function, right? They're not able to use their legs real well. And you got to teach them how to get around a bed. And if you can get them sitting, how could I have them scoot side to side on a bed with limited lower body function? Right? So that's scapular depression, right? And then they shift over. Important little movement pattern. All right, so you guys could write that down as an example. How'd you guys do on that graph? At the very least, you have a nice little study guide for the scapular muscles, right? And that's all the scapular muscles. That's it. No muss. You guys nailed it.